Hello, quad friends. Well, this is another installment of the road to 405, or the 405 highway, or the or the big wreck on 405. I really don't know what to call this video. Well, I can hear myself saying not that long ago that I was sure glad to be done with board number 6, because I didn't think that converting board number 5 would be anywhere as much work as board 6 had been. Well, how wrong can a person be? Well, pretty dang wrong this time, in my case. Well, what it all centers around is there were two different versions of this board, and what you're looking at here is the early version, board number 5, and you notice we have a connector. This is the next version of that board, and they got away from the connector and they went to a dual card edge of dual 22 and then 22, 44 pins. This is only a single 22. So they doubled the the connector space, and I guess in anticipation of yet this later version of board 5, which utilized a lot more of those connections. Well, I guess we could rough this out as being this is the first version of the Proc amp board 5, which would be, I think, 1962. It would be in the 1000C era, and through the early VR-1100 era, when it was low band mono. And then I think around 64, whenever it was, I think it was 1964, they did another change when they upgraded the Proc amp for color operation. And then yet again around 1967-68, when the PAL color was added for 625, then they had a third version. And so I had not really given that any thought, and having numerous spares, probably a dozen or more, looking back on it now, it's kind of puzzling to me, as out of all the spares in the box, how could I pick the one board that was not going to work? But I did. And I was going great guns, you know. I was drilling holes and cutting traces, and I had figured everything out to the last detail. And when I walked over to the machine to plug it in, well, you can guess the rest. It wouldn't plug in. Of course, you know, because I did not have an early Proc amp. This is the later version, which had the dual edge connector in slot number 5, as most of them did. So, you know, that was kind of a kick in the head to do all that and then find out that what I was going to do wasn't going to work. So, anyway, the book that I was using, the manual rather, and I have 2 of them here after I did a little research. These are the same number manuals. If you look at the spine of these manuals, it's the same publication number, so there's not a clue there as to any differences. And looking on the manual page, the board, which will be this little box here, is board number 5. And in this one, it's in the center here, board number 5. They are identical as far as the, electrically. But when you start looking a little bit closer at things, this is the early board, the early design, which is that board, and the one I started out with erroneously. The only clue you have is on this board 5, they used alphabet characters as pin designators. And on the later versions, they used numerals. And see, there's the later version, 405, using numbers, numerals. And this is the early version. And they're using alphabet characters. So, you know, that was kind of an unhappy surprise to discover that. And, you know, thinking about that a little bit further, I went and dug a little bit deeper into some of my junk and came up with this. Now, these are a couple of books from an actual 405 machine that was built in Belgium at the Ampex plant in Nevels, Belgium. And so we have the later version here, 2000B. Non-switchable. Now what that refers to is the inner switch. The earlier multi-standard Proc amp was what was known as an inner switch. It had actually stepping relays that changed connections and switched boards in and out. depending on what you had the machine selected the standard to. Well, they got away from that on the later 2000s, and then the 2000Bs. They were all non-switchable, in which you had different board sets, namely or mainly board 5 and board 6. And so if you were going to do another standard like a 405 or an 819, then you would just power it down and swap those two boards. And so anyway, looking through some of this older information, I came across this little bit of information, which somebody a long time ago had written all this out because they had many different machines. They had a 2000A, a couple A's with inter switches. They had a B with a 301, which is what we have. That was 1967 on, I believe, the 301 Proc amp. And that's in a 1200. And they had made a cross-reference here of the different Proc amps that they were using at the time and the board set, and noted the differences in the board sets across all three versions of the Proc amp. And of course there's our board 5. So anyway, this is all ancient history and mostly, I guess, forgotten nowadays. But maybe an interesting little detail to some of you quad guys that, you know, that are into this. And I must admit, I've been into this most of my life, and this is one thing that I've never ever knew about, was the some of these subtle differences in the Proc amp that were made over the course of a few years, you know, as the standards were being updated and adapted for color, and then other standards phased out, of course, you know, the 405 and the 819. And so I hope this is interesting and informative to someone. And now, you know, I have to start all over again on board 5.